Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second session of exploring the chakras within a transformative paradigm. Before we start, we'll have a moment of silence. So greetings, everyone. Warm welcome. And yesterday, Dr. Basu looked at the reality of the chakras and how they're formed. Today, he's going to take a deeper look into Aurobindo's perspective of the chakras and the Kundalini system as well. Now, I've been asked by a couple of people to suggest that you keep yourselves muted at all times until such time that you speak. And also, it would be a good idea if you turn your videos off until such time that you speak, because it's a big gathering and we need to preserve the internet connection. Thank you for your cooperation. Okay. So over to you, Dr. Basu. Looking forward to this session.
Thank you, James, and thank you, everyone, for giving a patient hearing and being here today also. So we'll continue from what we were talking about yesterday, when we had focused mainly on the origination of chakras, and I had explained that the chakras is something that has to be seen in a cosmic perspective, because we see usually it as something which is there in our individual selves, but then of course it is there, you can connect with it individually, but then that is proper place in the cosmic consciousness that has to be first understood. Then only our relation with the chakras will be meaningful. So yesterday we had discussed about this, that how the chakras are the connections, are the bridge between the evolutionary and the non-evolutionary, with the evolutionary and the non-evolutionary worlds, or the typal worlds, or the worlds that evolve and the worlds that do not evolve. And that something is coming down from below, something is pressing from below, the evolutionary nissus presses from below, while there are vortices of consciousness force, Chit Shakti, that are projected from the involutionary worlds, and at the junction, at the junction where they meet the evolutionary nissus from below, there are these energy centers or relay centers, the chakras that are formed. Now, today we'll be understanding it from one great perspective, from Sri Aurobindo, how he deals with the chakras in a completely new way, and then where he places in the structure of the being. You see, when we talk about a human being, then psychology talks about personality. But in the Indian tradition, we not only have personality, we have also impersonality. So we use the word being, and that the structure of being is a very intricate structure which Sri Aurobindo has given. We'll try to show a little bit of that structure, very, very intricate structure, a very complete, very thorough, and there you can understand where we can relate with the chakras at an individual level. Because chakras are something which we understood yesterday as a cosmic phenomena. And then as individuals, we have to relate with that cosmic phenomena. And therefore, their chakras have to be represented in our being also. And how they are related, how something which is there in the cosmic consciousness, how it can be related to our individual being. So for that, we have to understand the structure of the being. And then together with this, we'll be presenting you today Sri Aurobindo's entire view of the chakras, which is totally different from the traditional view. Because he has got one great aim, and that aim is transformation, not liberation, but transformation. Of course, he acknowledges liberation, but because his main aim is transformation, so he has to see how the chakras can be used in his transformative paradigm, how it can be used. So that is what he is doing. And in the process, what he is doing, he is also synthesizing the Vedantic tradition and the Tantric tradition. Also, this is something which will come to it, then we'll understand. To understand Sri Aurobindo's chakra system, you see how beautifully he is synthesizing, or he is trying to bridge them together, the Vedantic system and the Tantric system, which were always different systems, but he is trying to bridge them together. And in bridging them together, he is developing the concept of Yoga Shakti, which he is using in his paradigm, transformative paradigm, where the chakras have also a place. So we'll go to that. We'll start sharing the screen. So this was the last slide which we yesterday showed, and we start from that the descent of the supreme consciousness that took place when consciousness came down into the inconscience, and when it came down into the inconscience, the supreme consciousness force of Chit Shakti, it became dormant and became coiled up, and this is what that can be awakened as the Kundalini. So it is the supreme consciousness. It is the supreme consciousness that has actually come down into the inconscious, and in the inconscious it is present there as the Kundalini, and from there the Kundalini has to be aroused. So today's we are talking about sharing this perspective of the chakras. Now, so Kundalini or yogic force is asleep in Muladhara, or the basal chakra. It is covered in the other centers by the ordinary consciousness. It is asleep in Muladhara. So it is something which is there. It is lying at the bottom, which is the Muladhara is the lowest chakra, which is there at our physical substrate, which is there in our physical consciousness. It is there at our lowest level of our being, and there it is lying asleep. And if liberated, it will rise up to join the divine consciousness, which is above. So the Kundalini is asleep below, and it has to rise up and it has to join the divine consciousness. Now, this is in Kundalini, Sri Aurobindo is using the word yogic force, whereby he means that he is including here both the yoga and both the yoga of the Vedanta and the force of the Tantra. He is using them both together. He is considering them at one go. And like a serpent with the tail touching the lowest center and head the highest, you see when the Kundalini rises up, liberated, it rises up, and it is like a serpent with the tail touching the lowest center and head the highest. So it is uniting spirit and matter, which is very good, which is a great thing, which is something which has been achieved in the Indian spirituality in a great way, where spirit and matter, you see, are united by one same force. But then Sri Aurobindo says that it doesn't represent the transformation of the consciousness. You can it joins the lowest with the highest, but that does not necessarily mean that the consciousness it will get transformed. The lower consciousness will get transformed in terms of the higher. Now, when this Kundalini rises up from the inconscious, from below, because it is lying dormant there in the unconscious, there is a great upheaval. We'll talk about that tomorrow when we talk about the chakras individually. So that is a great upheaval. So it's nothing, it's a very serious thing. You see, it is from the terrestrial inconscious, something is arising up. From the terrestrial inconscious, at that time there is no individual. You see, in Sri Aurobindo's perspective, the individual, I am an individual, while if I descend down, a point comes, then I am no longer an individual. My unconscious merges with the terrestrial inconscious. So that is the difference with Freudians and with other all psychoanalytic theories and all. They talk about individual unconscious, or you might also talk about collective unconscious in a different sense. But in Sri Aurobindo's perspective, the individual, when the individual consciousness descends, it can descend up to a certain point as an individual. But after a certain point, it will merge with the terrestrial inconscious, which is a very important thing. It has other repercussions. What are the repercussions? The other repercussion is that individually, if you progress, you cannot go to the highest extreme last point until the bottom also rises up a bit. You see, because the terrestrial inconscious is there below from where we are arising. So individually, if I think that I will be the 100% perfect, I will reach the highest alone. It is not possible. After a certain point, I have to go and I have to wait till a little upliftment of the terrestrial consciousness takes place. Now, of the terrestrial inconscious takes place. A little upliftment of the mass consciousness takes place. So now you can ask the questions afterwards. You can just jot it down, otherwise they'll get we'll get astray. So you just point out, Shakuntaladi, just write down your question. We'll come to it. So what I'm wanting to say is this is very important, because sometimes once I think that this Makaran Paranjabi was asking, what is collective yoga in Sri Aurobindo? I don't find anything collective. He has written books on Sri Aurobindo, but he was telling that he came to Pondicherry and he was saying that I don't find anything collective yoga. I don't find any, and I don't understand that in Sri Aurobindo's yoga. Then I told him that there are two things. First is, one individual can do a work that can benefit the collectivity. Collective yoga doesn't mean that 1,000 people have to sit and take inhale by one nostril and exhale by the another nostril. It's not like that. There are many denouements of it. Of course, collective meditation is there, but then one individual can also work for the collectivity. And the second thing is that individually you can rise up to a point, and there you have to wait till the collectivity, the consciousness of the collectivity or the terrestrial inconscious, from there it rises up a bit. So every time you progress up to a certain point, and then you wait, then a little bit upliftment occurs at the bottom. Then again you progress, then again you have to wait till a little bit of progress occurs at the bottom. In this way civilization progresses, and the individual is not cut off from everybody. So this is collectivity, this is collective yoga. So we have to understand that rising up from that inconscious can cause an upheaval, and therefore you need guidance. And then Sri Aurobindo says that the energy in Kundalini is the mother's energy. I told you that the energy is, yesterday we discussed that it is Chit Shakti, and the embodiment of Chit Shakti is the mother principle. The mother principle is the embodiment. So you can understand Chit Shakti as just consciousness force, but you can understand it also as a being. And when you understand it as a being, then it is a being of the Supreme Mother. And then Sri Aurobindo reminds that there is no Kundalini Shakti above the head. Above the head is the universal, divine consciousness and force. And down below, when the consciousness lapses into the unconscious, there also you do not have any chakra. You see, chakras are also only there when things are organized. Where things are not organized, then you don't have the chakras. So things have to be organized. Consciousness has to be organized so that the chakras can be operated. So now, why transformation is needed? Why Sri Aurobindo is not satisfied with that usual Kundalini joining the lower and the higher? Why Sri Aurobindo needs a transformation? So this is what he says, that if one can remain always in the higher consciousness, that is very good. You can remain, but one cannot remain. You will see, if you have gone to the higher consciousness, and you have a great experience, it is very good. But you cannot remain there forever. Why? That he explains. That is a psychological thing. Why you cannot remain there forever? That's not spiritual, that is psychological. Because the lower is still part of our nature. The lower being is still part of the nature. And until the lower is transformed, it can pull down the higher. So and the lower has to be transformed. Until the lower is transformed, it can just pull down what is there at the higher consciousness. So one has to be always vigilant about it. That even if I have reached a very, very high consciousness, it doesn't automatically guarantee that I will remain there always. I cannot, because my lower nature is there. I have not cut off from my lower nature. I am, of course, a human being who has attained by sadhana, I have attained a higher thing. But I have to come back in my life. I have to come back in my lower nature and to survive in the world. And then therefore the lower nature can pull me down. Only if the lower nature is transformed, then you can remain in a higher consciousness in a better way or in a permanent way. Now this is something, again, we'll come back to this tomorrow actually, when we start in the individual chakras, just showing you that how Sri Aurobindo represents what his own classification of the planes of his consciousness with the different with the different levels where the chakras are operating. He's saying correspondences of chakra with planes of consciousness. So chakras are corresponding with the planes of consciousness. He's not telling that the plane of consciousness is the chakra. He's corresponding the chakra with the plane of consciousness, so that at the lowest end, you know that what Sri Aurobindo calls the physical consciousness, which has come up from the inconscience. No? It is there, it is corresponding with the lotus at the end of the spine, the Muladhara. And then what Sri Aurobindo calls the lower vital. Again, vital is a very important thing. Vital is a word which has been used as a noun for the first time by Sri Aurobindo. So vital, Sri Aurobindo means the repertoire which contains our energy, our dynamisms, our emotions. All that is contained in that. All that is contained in that vital. It is different from cognition, mind you. It is different from cognition. Western psychology, previously they were not differentiating from cognition and emotion. They have last 40-50 years they have differentiated cognition and emotion. After when the book came out, the emotional IQ and all that. But in Indian parampara, always there was this difference: the pranamaya purush, the monomaya purush, and the annamaya purush. So they were always different. Now this pranamaya purusha covers is in charge of the vital repertoire, you know, which contains our emotions, our dynamisms, and also our what you call the passions and all our interactions, which involve a lot of our sensual sensual stuff, all that. So vital is a very big thing. So there are many levels of the vital. So at the one level of the vital, which Sri Aurobindo calls the lower vital, which we'll discuss tomorrow. So that is that corresponds with the lotus of the abdomen, the swadhisthana. And then there is a higher vital, vital of dynamism, no? The vital that you need to make big things, no? To make big efforts. No? Unless you have a big vital, if you have a strong higher vital, then the platonic ideas, the theoretical ideas that you have in your mind, you cannot effectuate them in reality. So if you have theoretical ideas, and if you don't have a strong vital, especially a strong higher vital, these theoretical ideas will never become reality. So it is there that these lotus of the navel, the Manipura, the Navibadha, it is there, it is corresponding with that level. And then the lotus of the heart, and this is a very important plane, because it is on one hand, the heart is related with our dynamic vital being, with our emotions, and you need that to purify the system, to purify our system, to free us from our desires, to make love pure and all that. You need the heart chakra, you need the anahata, the lotus of the heart. But here, Sri Aurobindo again makes a difference. He brings in the psychic being behind the heart chakra. Now, the psychic being is not a chakra. The psychic being is not a chakra. But psychic being is something else. We'll discuss about it afterwards. But the psychic being is brought by him to be present behind the heart chakra. And therefore, this level where the heart chakra is operating, the level of the dynamic vital being, becomes something which is very important and very pivotal in our whole transformative paradigm which Sri Aurobindo has presented, which has to be understood very what you call, very finely it has to be understood. We have kept a separate session one day to understand only this plane, because it is very important, and it is the fulcrum on which the new process of the opening of the chakra, which Sri Aurobindo recommends, which is that will happen, that will be initiated there. Then we have the lotus in the throat. We'll come to that also. Expression, external mind. Yesterday somebody was asking about the relation of the chakras with the sound. So when we come to that, we will talk about that when we discuss about the lotus in the throat. And then you have the lotus in the forehead, which is also very important. The will, vision, and mental dimension, because you can use it in two ways. Either you can use that space to concentrate, to increase your willpower, but more important than increasing your willpower, you can use it to link your individual will with the universal will. To link your individual will with the universal will, or surrendering your individual will to the universal will. So the strengthening your willpower is not the primary thing. The primary thing is surrendering your willpower to the universal will. And then you have, of course, the which is all well known to you, the 1,000-petal lotus, the chakra, the center of higher will and knowledge. So we'll come to this one by one. We'll come to these chakras. We'll come to these centers. From tomorrow, we'll come one by one. But today we'll try to understand where these chakras are related in our being, and how can these chakras be corresponded from our individual being while we are traveling or traversing to the cosmic consciousness. And then how Sri Aurobindo is using these chakras in a completely different way, a completely different movement he is trying to bring. So he is not opening up the chakras, or not recommending the usual way of opening the chakras from below upwards. He's not doing that. He's bringing a very different way. And why he's bringing that, that also we'll discuss. Now the structure of the being, we come to that. The next picture is actually, it does not come very nice. So I have, the next slide is actually the main slide of the structure of the being, but it has come very small. I couldn't expand it. So in short, I can tell you that there are many levels of beings. Now, Sri Aurobindo considers the being as multiple perspectives, the being in multiple perspectives. So that is a vertical perspective that runs in us from the unconscious to the superconscious. So in us, there are many perspectives that are running simultaneously. There is a vertical perspective that is running from the unconscious to the superconscious. We are in the middle. And then there is a horizontal perspective, which is running from outside to inside. So there is an outer personality, and behind the outer personality, there is an inner being. There is an inner being, or a subliminal being, which is something which is a very new contribution of Sri Aurobindo to the world of thought. Mind you, Sri Aurobindo's entire psychology, entire sadhana, all this begins from the inner being. The outer being doesn't have that value in Sri Aurobindo's system. It is the inner being which is of value, because the outer being has come from the unconscious revolution. Yesterday we talked about it. The unconscious is composed of all opposite things now, which are there in the superconscious. So instead of love, there is hatred. Instead of light, there is darkness. Instead of joy, there is suffering. Instead of knowledge, there is ignorance. With all these things, the outer being comes up. And therefore, there is perpetual disharmony there. Unless you shift to the inner being. And otherwise, you will not be able to get over that disharmony which is there in the outer being. So you have to shift to the inner being. That's why understanding the inner being, which has an inner mind, which has an inner vital, which has an inner physical, and which goes up to the superconscious, which goes down to the unconscious, is very important. And then behind the inner being, there is a soul space. Somebody yesterday was asking about Chidakash. Also, Sri Aurobindo used the word Chidakash in some different ways, but also he used it also in this way in evening talks. He has described that the Chidakash also is the space which holds the soul, which holds our psychic being. So there is that, you see, that being is being held in that consciousness. There is a special space of consciousness where that is being held, which is the inmost being. And that inmost being has also got many poises. So that is a poise of the Monomoy Purusha, the true mental being, the poise of the Pranamaya Purusha, the true vital being, the poise of the Annamaya Purusha, the true physical being, and the psychic being of the Chaitya Purusha, who is the central point, which is coordinating everything, and which can come forward to replace the ego. So I think if it is if you can see it in your mobiles and laptops, this diagram, if you see, then this is a very important structure. where the superconscious is above, and the superconscious is above, the inconscious is below, and you see the inner being, the mind, vital, and the physical, the outer being, sorry, the outer being is the mind, vital, and physical. Now they are in perpetual disharmony. The outer being is in perpetual disharmony. Nobody is correlated with anybody. So the mind thinks something and the body thinks something else. Huh? The mind thinks that today I will read Savitri very seriously, and the body can come with a headache and disturb all your things. And you see the vital, the emotions think something, and the mind can have a doubt on what the emotions think. So somebody has fallen in love, but the mind has a doubt that whether that love is pure or not. So or is true or not. Now, how then we are surviving with such a disharmonious structure? We are surviving because the mind, vital, and the physical in the outer being is coordinated by something which Sri Aurobindo calls the ego. In Sri Aurobindo's system, ego is an entity. Ego is, he's not thinking about, he's not talking about ego in a moralistic sense, mind you. Egoism is something which is moralistic, but ego is not moralistic. Ego is an entity, and ego is trying to harmonize the mind, vital, and the physical. The only problem with ego is it is biased. It is biased. So sometimes it is biased towards the mind in intellectuals. It is biased towards the physical in sportsmen. In sportsmen, the physical consciousness, if they get affected, you can see as a doctor, I have seen very great footballers, very great sportsmen. When their physical consciousness get affected, they break down completely. And I'm surprised that what was the point in doing so much physical exercises? I have seen captains of the best football teams in India. I have seen captains of rival teams. They have come one after another for some reason or the other. Once I have seen the rival teams of both the captains of both the rival teams, and both of them were suffering, and like anything, they're broken down completely because something in their physical consciousness has been affected. You see, that physical ego is so strong in them. And then there is this, there are people now who are very much, the ego is much tuned with their desires, with their dynamisms, with their ambitions, with their passions. So ego is biased, it is not neutral. And therefore, it cannot harmonize things properly. And therefore, we have to go to the inner being, which is just behind the outer being. We have an inner being with an inner mind, inner vital, and the inner physical. Now, the inner physical, the word inner physical doesn't sound nice in English. So Sri Aurobindo used the word subtle physical. Now this inner being, now this is where you have to understand the place of chakras. Now this inner being is behind us. It is behind us. It is not in our body. No? It is behind us. It is in our subtle space. It is in the subtle space, though it is interfused with the body. It is interfused with the outer being. But then you have to understand. To understand, then you see, we understand things in a linear way. So we don't understand when everything is with everything. Everything actually is with everything. To understand that is very difficult. For the time being, let us segregate and just think that the inner being is behind us. It is a separate being behind us. Now, this inner being that is behind us goes above to the superconscious and goes below to the inconscious. So the inner being is the link between the vertical and the horizontal perspectives. So I told you that there is a vertical perspective of the being going from the lower to the higher. There is a horizontal perspective going from the outer to the inner, and the link between them is the inner being. And the inner being can go up to the superconscious, it can go down into the inconscious, and it spreads outside to the cosmic consciousness. It spreads outside to the cosmic consciousness. And from there, how things will come to us in the outer being, between the inner being and the outer being. Now listen, this is very careful to understand. And this is Sri Aurobindo's original contribution, which nobody has ever thought about it. Sri Aurobindo explains that between the inner being and the outer being, there are channels of communication. There are channels of communication. And these channels are mostly half closed or fully closed or a little bit open. Usually, very mildly they are open. They are not fully operative. They are very partially operative. So there are channels of communication between the inner being and the outer being. And all the good things, all the great creative things that are there in the cosmic consciousness, like great music, great arts, great creative ideas, they come from the cosmic consciousness to the inner being. And from the inner being to these channels of communication which are half open, they percolate drop by drop into the outer being. They percolate drop by drop into the outer being. And Sri Aurobindo has said very emphatically that this little percolation that happens, this drop by drop that comes, that is responsible for all the great things for which you are so proud. No? We are proud of our great creative outputs, our artistic outputs, our aesthetic outputs, our poetry, our music, and all these things. Little bit that has come as it produces such big things. And if these channels would have been made operative, then imagine what could have happened. What amount of creativity, what amount of from the cosmic consciousness, what amount you could have drawn, which would have actually made a blueprint for a better future. What could have we could have done that? And these channels of communication actually are situated in the inner being and projecting into the outer being, so that the base is in the inner being. These channels of communication, their base is in the inner being, and they're projecting, like you project something, they're projecting into the outer being. And these channels of communication are the chakras. So in Sri Aurobindo's perspective, the chakras are something not magical, something not like that, that has come dropped from the sky or has risen from the womb, not like that, nothing like that. They are just in the subtle world, they are the channels of communication between the inner being and the outer being. They are just the channels of communication between the inner being and the outer being. This is Sri Aurobindo's unique contribution to the world of thought. It is not known, because before you know that, you have to know Sri Aurobindo's structure of the being. And to understand Sri Aurobindo's structure of the being, then you have to understand the psychological system of Sri Aurobindo. So that is not much known. It is only recently that we are trying for professional, even in the academic world, that people should know about the psychological thought of Sri Aurobindo, how he presses the structure of the being, and he presses the entire, what we call our entire experiences that is possible in the world. He has shown that how they can all be related to the structure of the being. And this behind this inner being is the inmost being, or the soul space. In the soul space, you see that soul is the psychic being. Psychic being is this one. This is the psychic being, and the psychic being is coordinating the inmost being. Actually, in one poise it is the monomaya purusha, the true mental being. Another poise it is the pranamaya purusha, or the true vital being. Another poise it is the annamaya purusha, the true physical being. And in central it is the psychic being. Therefore, the soul entity or the psychic being is different from the chakras. Therefore, we must not confuse the chakras with the soul. So this is what we must not confuse. We must not confuse the chakras with the soul. We must not do that. So we will be very sure that they are completely different. They are in a completely different dimension. So there is an inmost being, inmost dimension. So that it is in the soul dimension, the soul space. So once and for all, we should be sure that the chakras are not representing the soul. Chakras are not representing the soul, or it is not the soul. And then the psychic being. What is the psychic being? This is also shared in this contribution to the world of thought. Is actually the mother used the word psychic being, and showing the took it from her. And the psychic being actually is a projection of the jivatma. Psychic being is a projection of the jivatma. The jivatma, which is the central being. The jivatma is here. Jivatma is a central being which is beyond the manifestation. Jivatma is not inside the manifestation. It is supporting the manifestation, but it is projecting something of it. It is projecting something of it into our being, into the structure of our being, into the manifestation, and that projection is the psychic being, which takes part in evolution. The jivata is behind. It is unborn. It is the unborn self. It doesn't take part in the evolution. So it is completely separate, beyond, behind. But it is projecting something, and that projection is the psychic being. Now, this is also very important, because when Sri Aurobindo will work on the chakras, then the psychic being has to come forward and to play a role, and to play a very important role. So Sri Aurobindo is bringing now the soul into the picture. The soul was not brought into the picture. So when the people were working so long, for thousands of years, with the chakras, they were only connecting the chakras with the cosmic consciousness. So that is a big thing, very great thing, connecting the chakras with the cosmic consciousness. But relating it with the consciousness of the soul, that is a very different endeavor. And that Sri Aurobindo does. And he cannot do it like that. He has to build up. He has to build up a system that can be done. So now the different beings, as I said, this is what I was repeating, that the outer being is revolving around the ego, because some of you could not have seen the diagram properly. Our outer being revolves around the ego. The inner being is free from the ego. the inner being is not dependent upon the ego. It is connected with the cosmic consciousness. Behind it, it is the soul principle. So the inner being has got more harmony than the outer being, only because it is not revolving around the ego, but it is actually supported from behind by the soul principle, by the psychic being. And it is the inner being that goes up to the superconscious. Now, otherwise, you can think that how with our limited mind we can go to the superconscious. You see, with our limited mentality, with our limited thinking, with our limited cognition, how you can imagine that we can go to the superconscious? It's only the inner being, the inner mind, which has no boundaries, no? Which can grow up. So you see, you have to cross boundaries, and to cross boundaries, then what you have to do? You have to go beyond the ego. Otherwise, you cannot cross the boundary. As long as you are within a boundary of the outer being, you are hooked to the ego. And while you are hooked to the ego, then you are working with chakras. Then there is one great risk. There is one great risk when you are working with the chakras and you have not got rid of the ego. So that is one risk. So we come back to the previous picture. You see that the ego is there, and you are working on the chakras here between the inner being and the outer being, and connecting with the cosmic consciousness, but the ego has not been worked upon. So it is dangerous. It is dangerous, extremely dangerous. One great dangerous point is that. The second dangerous point is that between the inner being and the outer being, there is a space. There is a space. And that space, Aurobindo calls, that space is an intermediate space. There is an intermediate space between the outer being and the inner being. Now it is a very dangerous space. You see, from the outer being, you have to go to the inner being. Into these channels of communication, if you open the chakras, then you can go. But otherwise, you can't, ordinarily you cannot go from the outer being to the inner being, ordinarily, unless the channels are there. But while going there, if you are not vigilant enough, if you do not have a proper guidance, then you can slip and fall into that intermediate zone between the outer being and the inner being. And once you fall into that intermediate zone between the outer being and the inner being, great catastrophes are waiting there for you. Great catastrophes are waiting there for you. You see, you can be subject to many things at many levels. You can have hallucinations, delusions, all sorts of disharmony, all sorts of illness. You can have psychiatric problems. Showing the space that one set of psychiatric problems comes from there. When one slips into the intermediate space between the outer being and the inner being, that space, even one slips there. So that is a very risky place. So therefore, number one risk was when you work with the chakras and you connect with the cosmic consciousness and you have not worked with the ego, there is one risk. And the second risk is that you can fall into that intermediate space between the outer being and the inner being. And depending upon the space that you are falling, the problems you will have. You see, because the space has different problems at different levels. At the level of the mind, you can have delusions. At the level of the physical, you can have hallucinations and illusions. So at the level of the physical, you can have somatic problems. So there are many problems are there, arranged one after another. And depending upon where you are falling down or where you are slipping down, you can have all those problems. There is another greater problem. You see, working with the chakras, and if you are not connected with the integral perspective, why is Aurobindo to make all this background? You see, because he's concerned with all the problems that can happen. And he had seen, he had experienced that all these things can happen. He knew that. What is that? That is another danger, which is a greater danger, greatest of all dangers. What is that? The greatest of all dangers is that when you open to the cosmic consciousness, when the chakras are opening to the cosmic consciousness, in the cosmic consciousness, there are great negative waves and there are great positive waves. In the cosmic consciousness, everything is there. There are great negative vibrations and there are great positive vibrations. So everything is there in the cosmic consciousness. And once the door opens, you have opened the door, the chakra has opened, your chakra has opened, you have opened up from the individual to the cosmic consciousness. And from there, the great things can come. But remember, the dangerous things which are there, the great negative things that are there, they can also come inside when the door opens. And when they come inside, they can do two things. They can do two things. They can go in front and catch hold of your ego. They can go in front and catch hold of the ego. And that's how you see that some people, who start spiritual pursuits very sincerely, after some years, you can see that they have become very diabolical. They become very dangerous. They become the opposite of what they had started. This happens. This is a natural thing. It's it's a risk in spiritual practice. Every practice has a risk. Spirituality has a risk. And one of the risks in spirituality is that when you open up very sincerely to the cosmic consciousness, but you have not worked on your ego, you have not repressed the ego, then the negative forces from inside can come and catch hold of the ego and make you into a diabolical person. That's why many tantrics, they become very diabolical. After they opened their chakras and they were doing their Kundalini, they become so perverted, they become so diabolical. Then another thing they can do, that is one possibility. The other possibility that these negative forces can do, they can come inside and they can raise a curtain between your soul and the rest of the being. They can raise a curtain between the soul and the rest of the being. So they can cut off the soul from the rest of the being. So that is called possession. In Sri Aurobindo's thing, in Sri Aurobindo's system, this is possession. Possession is not that one ghost has come. No? One ghost has come and has entered into you. It is not. In Sri Aurobindo's thing, the possession is not such a simple thing like that. Or jeen aa gaya, or bhoot aa gaya. It's not like that. It's something that negative force from the cosmic consciousness has entered, and it has entered and it has put a veil, the curtain between the soul and the rest of the being. Now, Sri Aurobindo is wanting to take precautions in a way so that the chakras will be worked upon without the possibility of all these problems happening. So, without the possibilities of all these problems happening, remember the ego, or the intermediate space between the inner being and the outer being, we can slip down, or the cosmic negative forces that can come inside, catch hold of the ego, or put a curtain between the soul and the rest of the being. All these things will make you slip. And Sri Aurobindo is wanting to be sure that his work of transformation will be done with the help of the chakras and without the influence of all these negative things. How to do? So that is the main thing. So this is what I was talking about. The cosmic forces enter the inner being. Between the inner and outer being are channels of communication, and the cosmic forces that enter the inner being percolate into the outer being through half-open channels. Even that trickle produces great creativities. These channels are the chakras. So this is Sri Aurobindo's very unique things. You must remember this, and such a beautiful explanation he has given. And these are, you see, the chakras are placed here. So Sri Aurobindo focuses on the center truth of chakras without subjection to the old forms and symbols. For in the old forms and symbols, how many petals are there, how many colors are there? Of course, we'll talk about that, significance of the number of petals and the significance of the colors, but they're very secondary also. In Sri Aurobindo's system, all these things are extremely secondary. And Sri Aurobindo says that usually people relate with the physical centers because the subtle body penetrates and is infused with the gross body. Therefore, people find correspondences where they do not exist. And then when he was asked this question, that the chakras correspond to nerve ganglia, he said, of course, there are certain centers in the physical body with which the chakras corresponded. But these centers, you see what these centers are, you cannot confuse these centers with the chakras. There are certain centers, but with the chakras correspond with, we can correspond with these centers, but doesn't mean that those centers are the chakras. With the chakras are always you have to consider in a subtle thing. Then we are talking about the intermediate zone between the inner being and the outer being. While traversing from the outer to the inner being, one can fall into the intermediate zone, causing psychopathologies like illusions, hallucinations, delusions. We call that spiritual emergency. Now, this is the main thing where I wanted to come today. This is the main thing. What is that? Moving from below upward, the activation of chakra disturbed the ignorance at different levels. So the Tantra, what was doing was activating the chakra from below upwards. Chakras were being activated from below upwards. They were not concerned about the ego. They were not concerned about the other things in the cosmic consciousness, whether they will enter or they will disturb. They were just opening up the centers, chakras one by one. You need proper guides. Of course, you can do it correctly without all those problems. If you have proper guides, then we will not fall into that problem. But these proper guides were not available after some point in time. And activation of the lower centers, they kindle great amount of physical and sexual energies. The middle center result in egoistic disturbances. No? Activation of the middle centers, they result in egoistic disturbances. Activation of the higher centers can cause intellectual distortion of truth. So remember, activation of the lower chakras can cause an increase of physical and sexual energies of the middle centers in egoistic disturbances, in the higher centers in intellectual distortion of truth. And yet, we talked about yesterday, the erotic art in temples like Khajuraho and Karnataka came when consciousness got stuck up there. Or I said that some people might have been wanting to work at that level. At each level, there is a good thing, there is a negative thing, there is an adaptive thing, there is a maladaptive thing. Might be some adaptive things were taken, and then they were given an exaggerated importance, by which we had these things like erotic art in temples. But now Aurobindo modifies this thing. How Aurobindo modifies? Aurobindo prefers a different route. He doesn't want that from below we will go upwards. He doesn't want that. He wants that the higher consciousness will come down. So the centers will open because of pressure from above. And this will be very flexible because it will not follow the old systematic routine. When the higher force comes down, it will act on the centers which are necessary for each person. So for me, opening the centers X and Y and Z are important. For you, it might be A, B, other centers which are important. So for me, for some person, the heart center has to be open first. For some person, the physical center has to be open first. So everybody of us have different swadharmas, have different personalities, have different consciousnesses, and different points of sadhana, are different points in consciousness we are located. So according to our needs, the higher force will come. It will not follow any graded pattern. There is no sequence to it. It will only open what is important for you to open first. So it will be a very flexible thing. And this descent, so then we say that will be no ascension, because we know that in Kundalini rises up and joins the higher force. So you are saying that the higher force will descend. So nothing will ascend and join with the higher force. Of course, the pressure of the descent will actually lead to an ascent. The ascent will occur in a different way. I'll come to it. Ascent, of course, will occur because the force has to ascend and join the higher consciousness. But first, the descent will occur, and the descending force will release the energy which will ascend. So the descending force will come down and will release the energies which will be different for different people. For some, one level of energy will ascend. For another person, another level of energy has to ascend. So different persons will be acting differently. Different persons will have different yogas, their own personal yogas in this method. And now the question is that if such a solution is there, that you can go, we had always thought of going from below upwards. And Aurobindo is saying, coming from upwards below. You see that force is coming down upwards below. I still remember many years back, 40, 50 years back, Madhav Pandit was giving a lecture on Tantra. He was giving a Ramakrishna mission, where because people do not understand, he was using a different terminology. He was explaining to them that there is a Mahakundalini above, which can be brought down. So his voice still sounds in my mind. Now, you can tell that why such a simple solution was not given before. Was it not given before? That you can rise from below up. That is another technique, that up can come down. Why the world had to wait for thousands of years for Aurobindo to tell this? Why it didn't stuck to anyone? Because the force that will come down is a force of transformation that has been activated by Aurobindo. That was not known before. That was not known before. You know, we do not understand that how Aurobindo is new, completely new to the world of consciousness, completely new to the world of thought. How Aurobindo brings completely new things which were never there before. It is he who has activated that force of transformation, conceived of it and activated it, and made it possible for it to come down. If he had not activated it, it would not have come down. So it is his yoga, his supramental yoga, his yoga of transformation. He has done for that for humanity. I have gathered my dreams in a, he has said, and I have gathered my dreams and I've left it there, my jewel dreams of you. So this is his jewel dreams that he has kept for us, the force of transformation. It is he who has activated it. It is he who has made it possible so that might come down. And Aurobindo's process is new. For the descending force is a force of transformation that has been worked by him. And this transformation will need, in the individual, it will need something, a reference point. You see that transforming force that will come down, it will not come down like that. You see, you have to open a tap. You see, otherwise the water will not come down from the reservoir above. You have to open a tap. And that opening of the tap is the activation of the psychic being. We'll come to that. We'll understand it fully when, I think after 2 days, we'll talk about the psychic being. So the activation of the psychic being has to be activated. Then only that force of transformation can come down. Therefore, Sri Aurobindo's vision is enriching and changing the chakra paradigm from a liberative to a transformative paradigm. You see, when you are going from below up in the whole process, you are liberating the consciousness from all the centers and going up, and you get liberated from everything. But Sri Aurobindo is bringing the force down to transform everything, and the force of transformation does its work automatically. Even if you are not aware of the chakras, again, this is again Mother and Sri Aurobindo's great grace that has given to us, that if you are open to the Mother, if you are open to with your psychic being, then the force of transformation will come down. It will work on your chakras, whether you are aware of it or whether you are not aware of it. Actually, the work will be done automatically. The work will be done. If you are, you see, when in Mother Sri Aurobindo's paradigm, most people don't know about chakras. In Sri Aurobindo's record of yoga, there are very few references to chakras. Was he ignoring chakras? Not at all. He made a system where the force will come and will work automatically on the chakras, even if you are not aware of it. It doesn't matter whether you are aware of it, whether you are conscious of it or you are not conscious of it. And then it is here, which is very important. As Sri Aurobindo says, nothing can be done. Nothing can be done except the force of the Mother. And Sri Aurobindo had to reconcile Vedanta and Tantra to come to this position. He explains that the Gita follows the Vedantic tradition. But Gita doesn't give so much importance to the Divine Mother because his object is to draw back from the world nature. So it gives more emphasis on the Ishvara aspect. But the Tantric tradition, it wants to dominate the world nature. So it relies on the Ishwari aspect, on the Shakti aspect more. And Sri Aurobindo says that he needs both. His yoga insists on both the aspects, but the surrender to the Divine Mother is essential. Without it, there is no fulfillment in this yoga. This work will not be done because the Mother's force directly works on the psychic being. And I tell you, this is one thing, a secret that I will tell you. Why in Pondicherry ashram, the only ashram in the world where initiation doesn't happen. Every ashram you have a diksha. You have to have a diksha by a mantra. In our ashram, the only place in the world where initiation is not needed, doesn't happen, because the Mother's force directly acts on the psychic being. Because the Mother's force directly acts on the psychic being, therefore the initiation is not necessary. So there is no fulfillment unless we fall back on the Mother, unless we surrender to the Mother. And this is how Sri Aurobindo reconciles the Vedanta and the Tantra by using the term Yoga Shakti. So there is a force which accompanies the growth of the new consciousness. This force is the Yoga Shakti. The yoga here is taken from the yogi from the Vedantic tradition and Shakti from the Tantric tradition. And in that consciousness force, or and because of that, he had to modify Sat Chit Ananda. He modified the Chit of Sat Chit Ananda as Chit Shakti. So he's from Sri Aurobindo, it is Shat Chit Shakti Ananda. And it is there, he is balancing the two. So, and this is the Kundalini Shakti is there, the Yoga Shakti is there, coiled as the Kundalini Shakti, but above us, it is there as a divine force, not coiled up, not asleep, but awake, extended, wide. It is waiting for manifestation, and we have to open to the power of the Mother so that it comes down. You see, the force, the Kundalini, which is there below, that is one thing, and above, it is there present in its plenary beatitude. It is present in its grandeur. It is present as extended and wide, and we have to just open to it and ask and aspire and pray to the Mother so that it can come down and do its work on us. So in our yoga, there is no willed opening of the chakras. They open themselves by the descent of the force. In the Tantric discipline, this is shown in these words, they open from down upwards. The Muladhara first. In our yoga, they open from up downwards. But the ascent of the force also takes place. The object of a yoga is to establish direct contact with the divine above and to bring down the divine consciousness from above into all the centers. Occult powers belonging to the mental, vital, and subtle physical planes are not our objects. Our object is not to have occult powers at each level, which tantrics do. Our object is not that. Our object is to have a direct contact with the divine force which is above. So this is our central object. So one can have contact with various divine forces and personalities on the way. You see, when you are going up, as I told, that the chakras are the connections between the involutionary and the evolutionary worlds. So in the involutionary or the non-evolutionary worlds, there are many types of forces. There are angels, there are gods, there are goddesses, there are demons, there are rakshasas, and the Oshiras, and you can connect with any of them. But for us, they're all temporary things. That is not the main thing. For us, we have to keep the central truth behind and realize it independently without subjection to any of those things. So that is very important. And what is descent? Descent is felt as a, when you talk, we are saying that consciousness is descending. What is descending? As Sherman explains, that descent is felt as a pouring in of calm and peace, of force, of light, of ecstasy, of joy, of wideness, of freedom, of knowledge. The divine being comes down as a presence. Sometimes one of these, sometimes several of them together. So when Sri Aurobindo says that the force is descending, what is descending? We will experience it as something like calm and peace, something as force and power, something like light and knowledge, something like joy and ecstasy, something like wideness and freedom, or something like a divine being that is coming down. And ascent also happens. The pressure of the descent causes something to ascend. And what is ascent? It is not a specialized process. Means opening of the chakras one after another in a geometrical way. That's called the specialized process, the way of the tantra, where you use a geometrical way to open up. But it is not like that. It is a spontaneous approach of the whole of the lower consciousness. Now, when the higher consciousness comes down, something from you comes up. It can come at from very different levels, things can come up. And Sri Aurobindo says there are three possibilities. So it may liberate the consciousness. When the ascending force can liberate the consciousness. So you will not feel the body, or you will feel that the body is there. I have left the body behind, or the body is almost non-existent. Just a point. So your consciousness can go up and join with the higher consciousness, leaving your body. So the body might be non-existent, or you can feel it just as a point. Or some part of the being might go out from the body. You see, some part of the being can move elsewhere. So there is something you need to have occult knowledge for that. There's some part of the being, when you ascend up, some part of the being can go, and it can go elsewhere. It can go to the world of some gods, some angels, or somewhere, and have some experience from there. Or more importantly, for Sri Aurobindo, the consciousness may be empowered to enter within. So the inner being, and it can go to the inner being, and it can go to the psychic being, and it can be one with them, and it can have an integral, so you have an integral vision of the whole thing. So the consciousness that is rising up can also empower your whole consciousness, empower your individuality, go inside your inner being, and your inner being will be full of that ascending consciousness that is wanting to go up, and which is also inviting the up to come down. So everything there can be integrated, and your whole being will be flooded in that integrated vision. So it is the repeated and constant ascent of the lower consciousness that enables the mind, the vital, the physical to come into touch with the higher planes up to the supramental and get impregnated with the light and the power and the influence. So it is very important. That ascent is important, of course, but the ascent comes after the descent, when the proper things will ascend up, and without the risk that is involved. No? Because in ascension, there is always a risk that is involved, as we discussed, and the risk, without the risk, you see, and also another risk that I had mentioned yesterday, which I didn't mention today, the risk of the inconscience pulling everything down. So there is a risk of the inconscience that is pulling everything down. There is a risk of the ego, which can distort things. There is a risk of falling into the intermediate space where you can get lost. And there is a risk of the negative forces from the cosmic consciousness entering into your being and either catching up your ego, making you a diabolical person, or making a veil between you, between the soul and the rest of the being, which is the position. So there are these four ways where problems can happen. From the inconscious, from the ego, in the intermediate space when you fall down, and negative forces from the cosmic consciousness, which is called position. So all these four, without all these things you can ascend if the descent occurs first. If the descent occurs first, then something pure is coming up and bringing up whatever ascent is necessary. You see, when the upper thing descends, it releases onto those forces which is different in different individual, forces which are necessary for each individual. So they will only be brought up, and you need that to ascend. so that you can come to touch into the higher planes and then go up to the supramental. So that ascending force is necessary. And it is the repeated and constant descent of the divine consciousness and force that is the means for the transformation of the whole being. And this is again Aurobindo adds that he is not only satisfied with the ascent, the repeated descent. So ascent is happening repeatedly, and the descent is also happening repeatedly. And the repeated and constant descent, you see, repeated and constant descent, there also he has used the word, these are Aurobindo's own words, repeated and constant ascent, repeated and constant descent. Something has to be done constantly. So this means for the transformation, this is important. And once this descent becomes habitual, the power of the mother begins to work. No longer from behind, but consciously. Consciously in our Adhar, in our receptacle, in our being. So when this descent becomes habitual, when I am open to the force of transformation, when I've surrendered myself totally to the higher force, it will come down, it will act on our chakras even without my knowing it. Because actually the power of the mother will now be inside and it will start working. For example, I will tell you again before we break in for our glass of water, we break. We say that as mother told to one of my friends that open to me, turn to me. You cannot do anything yourself. You cannot do anything by yourself. Open to me and turn to me. I will do whatever is necessary. Only I can do whatever is necessary for what is for you. So our task is to bring down and to establish the mother in our heart, in our system, so that in our Adhar, so that all the work that is being done will be done automatically. Of course, knowledge of the whole thing also is very important, necessary. Then we are fully aware of what is going on. And when we are conscious and aware of what is going on, otherwise you Aurobindo would not have written long passages describing everything. You see, in one way I am telling that even if I am not aware, things will happen. At the same time, I am telling that of course it is necessary for us to be aware of what is happening, because once we are conscious of what is happening, then we can consciously collaborate. We can consciously collaborate. We will not be blind followers. No? We will not be blind adherents on the way. So we can be conscious collaborators. If you know, otherwise, sure, we know that not have written paragraphs of the paragraphs, pages of the pages describing this whole thing. We'll stop here and we'll come back for questions and answers and comments and views within a few minutes. Is 5? Yes. Yes, we'll come back within 2 to 3 minutes. We'll start again. Yes, you can come back. And Manan, you were wanting to say something?
Yes, Dada, thank you. My question is, can you talk a bit about vital will and mental will, and also the role of the role of consciousness force for activation and transformation of these two? Like, what is the difference?
Okay. We'll go to these individual chakras where I will talk about this.
Okay, thank you, Dada.
And is the structural central being corresponds with the Jivatma. Shakuntaladi wanted to raise, was raising her hand. Have you written your question, Shakuntaladi? Shakuntaladi, have you written your question? You raised your hand, you were wanting to raise your hand at that time? And Siegfried, what he is saying that, of course, there is a bidirectional connection between the inner being and the outer being. And but in Aurobindo's perspective, actually, you have to go to the inner being, then you have to actually you have to surpass the ego. And the connection from the ego to the inner being happens by surpassing the ego. Of course, you can go at any level. At any level, what you are saying, you can go at any level, you can start that work at any level. Because the ego also, I think one day if we talk about the ego, then it will be more easier for you to share the things about the ego. But you can actually work and start your work at any level. Oh, that is Monica's. That how do you know practically that we have worked on the ego or we have fallen in the that requires your experience, because you have to understand what is the ego, and then I think we should have a program on the ego. Then things will get clear. Now, you see, where consciousness is not what Mr. Lahiri says, that where consciousness is organized into a into something, so the manifestation is taking place. Where there is no manifest, where you are going from manifestation to the place where everything is open, unmanifest. Now, then you cannot. That the chakras are not operative there. Chakras are operative only when the involutionary and the evolutionary worlds are there, and both the worlds have forms. Now, the evolutionary forms are there, and the involutionary worlds also have their forms in the form of gods and goddesses and angels and asuras and all. So these formative worlds, both in the involutionary and the evolutionary worlds, they are needed to have for the chakras to be operative. Where the formations don't stay, for example, the higher super conscious where formations are not there, or below you go down to the unconscious where formations are not there. Everything is amorphous below and everything is there, what you call spread out and vast above. So there the chakras are not operating. Yes. The same as Shaktipat, I will not be able to tell this this term. I don't know. I think Professor Shailendra, if he is acquainted with that, tell is Shaktipat. Shaktipat means the way of the Tantra, but Aurobindo has very specifically said that the process of descent was not familiar in the Indian system. It was not a familiar thing. Central being. Central being. Is very interesting. This question of Harish is very interesting. The central being of the Jivatma is there. Central is behind the manifestation, beyond the manifestation. So it is there in the cosmic consciousness. Now, is the Jivatma? Is the Jivatma singular or plural? Is the Jivatma singular or plural? Manan, what do you think? Is it singular or plural? Jivatma? I'm asking Manan.
You've taken me completely by surprise, but I would, if I were to guess, I would say singular.
See, it is both singular and plural. Simultaneously, it is singular and plural. You see, it is right. You see that we have a word in India. You see, we have a saying that everybody's Atma is the same. Again, but everybody is also different. You know, how is it that? Because the Jivatma, the individual being, you see, like if you see a curtain in your house, and the curtain has different folds. So every fold is unique, but all the folds are connected and coming from the same curtain. So it's like that. Every Jivatma is unique, but every Jivatma is coming from the same matrix. So it is the same with everything. But again, it is unique because the fold is unique, and again it is also with others because it is coming from the same matrix. Now the Jivatma and the psychic being, the difference has to be known in Aurobindo system. When psychic being contains our intensest emotions, now our intensest feelings and longings, all our movements of consciousness in its intensest form. So intense love, all things that are intense joy, or what we call our intense emotions, intense passion, everything in its purest and intensest form is there. We experience when we go to the psychic being. Whereas the Jivatma is something which is everything is very broad, very wide. Jivatma is wide. Where consciousness, when you go to the Jivatma, you feel that the consciousness has become very wide. You feel impersonality. You don't feel the personality. You feel the personality, you feel it as a projection of impersonality. So it is a great wideness, expansion, wideness, expansion, total freedom that is there in the Jivatma, the experience of the Jivatma. And the experience of the psychic being is intense, the intensest of everything. Now, in our path, in Integral Yoga, you need both. You need to have an experience of both. You need to have the experience of the intensest things, and you need to have the experience of the widest of the thing. You need to have both. What practices we can learn for the descent to happen? But this is first is, of course, psychic being. First is that we have to work on our psychic being. And then, you see, only when we have worked on the psychic being, you see why it is important, because as in general, we are all jumbled up, disharmonious beings. You see, what have I composed of? A little bit of emotions, a little bit of thoughts, a little bit of good things, a little bit of bad things, and all that mixture of everything. Now, only when I go to the inner being, things begin to become separate. And when I go to the psychic being, I can actually harmonize all the discordant parts of the being around the psychic being. And only when I have harmonized everything around the psychic being or the central principle, then only we are fit for all this process of ascent and descent. Otherwise, we are not fit for it. So the first thing in ordinary life, we have to make a harmonization of our personality. Yes, those who have raised your hands, transcendence is Jivatma. Jivatma is in the cosmic consciousness, but Jivatma also has come from the transcendent. You say the Jivatma has actually come from the transcendent and it has established itself in the cosmic consciousness so that it can project the individual. So it is the same thing which has come from the transcendence and has had the footing in the cosmic consciousness so that it can project itself into the individual. Yes, those who have raised your hand, please tell. You can tell directly.
Hello, my name is Siegfried. I post that comment about the interlink between the outer being and the inner being direction. And then what you say about ego, I'm using the concept of personal ego as the possibility to unify and use the mind as an instrument to focus the process outer inner directly up to the inner being, not stacking, not a point fixing or focusing the mind in the chakras, only using the connection channel. And then you experience directly the inner being. This is what I'm investigating.
Yes. Well, of course, what you're saying is right. That one can do that. We are trying to understand things from the chakra angle, but these things happen automatically itself, whether we are aware of the chakras or not. It doesn't matter. Shavindra has given it in a vast way. You can work directly. The system works automatically.
Yes.
Dr. Basu, this is Shakuntala. Shakuntala Mane. Where does the subliminal come? Subliminal?
Subliminal is the inner being. Shavindra uses the word subliminal to describe the inner being. Subliminal being is the inner being. The inner being which is standing behind the outer being. Actually, to understand why I am saying standing behind, it is there permeating everything, interfused with everything. It is a different dimension. So we are not only in our outer being, we are also having an inner being and living in it. Only we are not conscious of it. Yes, Dr. Vaishnav will say something.
Yes. I think the process of descent, the beautiful sonnet by Aurobindo, it explains it very well. Thy golden light.
It can be used for meditation. Yes.
It explains all the level it comes down, and then it is so beautifully described. Thy golden light came down to my brain, and the grey rooms of my mind sun-touched became. A bright reply to wisdom's occult plane, a calm culmination and a flame.
You see how scientific he is. He is so scientific. He is actually concerned with the bodily organs and the transformation, because the new body, the organs will change in their functioning and the structure. Therefore, he says the word, the grey cells of my mind. He's talking about the grey matter. He's not talking about the abstract theoretical mind. He's talking in concrete terms. He's talking about the grey cells of the mind. He's talking about the grey matter. So, because he wants the light which will come down, he has said that there will be a corporeal change, and the corporeal change of the body organs will include both a functional change and a structural change. And that is why you see that so beautifully this poem here is given his scientific mindset, he has introduced it here.
Yes, and when the next stanza, it is even more concrete. I mean, what you described, same. Thy golden light came down into my throat, and all my speech is now a tune divine. A paean song of thy single note. My words are drunk with thy immortal's wine. Thank you.
Yes. Very nice.
Sir, can I ask you a small question, sir?
Yes, yes.
So this is Vivek Sharma. Sir, I wanted to ask you, when we're talking about chakras, how important is it for chakras to open? Because if I talk to you about with my personal experience, I do not know whether my chakras are open or closed. But you see a descent, you feel a descent, you feel a descent of force, and which can be from your overhead, which flows in, or in your heart chakra, or wherever it is. So you do feel it sometimes, you don't feel it sometimes. So does it really happen that your chakras are open when you feel the descent? And when you don't feel the descent, the chakras get closed, or they always stay open?
The chakras, what happens is that usually they are not fully open. And our task is that when the forces come down, that they will become operative. Now, what you say is that whether it can go back to the previous stage of when it was fully operative, and it can become less operative. So that is a question of individual sadhana. We have to see. Yeah, I think that people usually who are making progress will go on progressing. Unless you have a fall, and something can happen, and unless you have a very gross fall, otherwise these things. But at the beginning, there will always be fluctuations. In the beginning, we are not, we cannot become experts on the way. When you are working on opening all of this communication, so there will be always fluctuations in the beginning. Opening, closing, sometimes closing, sometimes opening, sometimes passing right fully. So there will be a wide variety, of course. Yes, Shomundaraji.
Thank you, sir.
No, I think she's already asked. Can I ask another question, Dada?
Yes, yes.
Okay, will we also be covering or talking about the interplay of the various chakras, or say the different parts of the being with each other? Because also that's also obviously quite important, right?
Because when the power descends from above, it can open whatever way. There is no grammar. It will open wherever you can be ready at 2-3 different points.
Yeah.
So there is a wide flexibility in its working. So
right.
it doesn't work systematically. It works according to its own whims, according to the Adhar, what is ready. And then Aurobindo considers reality to be pluridimensional. So that means we can be perpetually in the mode of multitasking.
So there is also one more question I had, just just for my more clarification. When there is a descent, now the descent of force, obviously, because of Mother and Shirando, what we have been reading and what we have been following, the descent is from the overhead. And as the descent happens, but it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of concentration or something for the descent to happen to the lower vital, which is below the navel. So the descent is very happy. It goes up to the heart chakra, and just below that to your fourth chakra. But below that, it is a difficult task, and that descent doesn't happen, or maybe you don't feel that enjoyment which comes in, and the pleasure that you receive on the other levels. So is it something like is there a blockage, or maybe
it takes time, you see, because there are many one of the most important obstructions, of course, is the inconscience, and which cannot be overcome because the inconscience has been produced by the overmind. The brain of the gods that has produced the overmind, as Aurobindo has explained very beautifully in the Life Divine. The overmind itself has programmed the inconscience. So that is why it is so very difficult. If you see in the classical Indian tradition, it has always been said that on an average, it takes 40 years to come into contact with one's soul. So you see that it is not a question, you see all these things which you measure, it is not a measurement in time, but a measurement in terms of consciousness that we have to make. And time has to be made into a friend. I think if you taking an extension from what you are saying, that in today's world, one of the most difficulties, if you ask me, is stress management. What is the most important difficulty that I find? I will say that as a psychiatrist, I find that the most important thing is that people are always competing with time. We are competing with deadlines of time. And in synthesis of yoga, Aurobindo in the 4 aids has said that time has to be made into a friend. Once time has been made into frame, then you do not measure in terms of linear time, but in terms of temporality. You see, another thing is that all the things are there together everywhere, every time. For example, yesterday I was saying that linear thinking and circular thinking. That if you ask that, we always have been told that the one became many. But did the one become many at a particular point in time when a big gong was sounded? In Aurobindo view, it is not like that. Always the one is there and always the many are there. In one poise it is one, another poise it is many. If the many is not there, something still remains. That is the one. And if the many is not there, the many can again come out. So you see, things are circular. Things are circular. So all things are going on together. So we are extrapolating it. Otherwise, we don't understand. Even the inner being, that diagram that I made, still it is not a representative diagram, because the inner being actually is interfused, no, with our outer being. We are in many worlds at the same time, which are not aware.
Correct.
Anyway, but it's still beauty to go into Aurobindo's things and to understand, because he has explained things in a way which nobody has explained.
No, that's true, sir. And it is, as you rightly said, it's an adventure at every step. As Mother has said, to get into yoga, it's an adventure. And people who are willing to get into the adventure.
Somebody has asked, the individual effort is required for the working on the psychic being. If a very sincere work on the psychic being and offer to the mother, then the descent will happen. Yes, you can harmonize and give it to her. Leaving it to her is very important. If you can leave it to her, then of course you will get a great prize if Ira can do it. Because you see, we cannot leave. You see, most of our prayers remain unanswered, because we pray that we will not think about something, and then the next moment we begin to think about it. So a cross connection happens and the prayer goes away. So to live is very important thing. To live it means a very integral thing, to surrender. So if you can really surrender, then you don't need anything now, or things will happen automatically. You have to work on your psychic being, and at that price you have to surrender. Yes, the heart chakra has to be activated to find one psychic being. No, it doesn't mean. The heart chakra is independent of the psychic being. We'll talk about it when the psychic being is, you don't have to work on the heart chakra, you can directly go to the psychic being. So, anything else? Dr. Vaishnav will add something?
Dr.
Professor Shailendra has not spoken.
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Your, feedback.
Yeah, I have a question for you, actually. First of all, would you define what you mean by poise? I've heard this. I think I have a rough idea. But I think poise, the word poise.
Poise.
Yes.
P-O-I-S-E, poise.
And secondly, what is the inmost being? We talked about outer being and inner being. What is the inmost being?
The inmost being, I didn't understand when I talk about the poise. If I talk about the inmost being is the soul principle, which is there, which has been projected into the by the Jivatma into the manifestation. And this inmost being is present, is the same thing, but it can be present in many ways. It is the same thing, but it can be present as when it is supervising the mental things, it is present as the Monomaya Purusha. And the same thing when it is supervising the vital, it is present as the Pranamaya Purusha. And it is the same thing again when it is supervising the physical, it is present as the Annamaya Purusha. But when you are wanting to realize them, you have to realize them through different ways. You see, the same way you cannot realize the all the three. With the Monomaya Purusha, then you have to go above your complexities of your thinkings, above you have to get detached from your thoughts, from everything. But the Pranamaya Purusha is more difficult. To have an experience of the Pranamaya Purusha is more difficult, because you have to have an absolute silence, absolute passivity of your entire system. The entire system has to become totally silent and passive, especially your vital. Then only you can have access to the Pranamaya Purusha. So you see, though they are the same thing in different ways, they are acting. So, but they have to be reached in different ways. So that is why the poise becomes important, because the same thing in different poises have same thing has different implications at different levels. Now, but again, centrally, they are represented as the psychic being or the Chaitya Purusha. They are represented. But if you say, as this question was raised by Siegfried, that the same thing which is there in the transcendent, in the universal, it has a different grammar, and in the individual, it has a different grammar. So the same thing also is transcendent, universal, and individual. Says, but when it is transcendent, its system is different, its realization is different. As universal, again, it is different, and as an individual, again, it is totally different. So that is why the word poise assumes a significance, because it is not only the same thing in different ways, but its whole implications are different. The ways of understanding them are different. The ways of the action are different. The ways of realizing them are different. But at the end, it is the same thing in the different ways in which we are looking at it.
Is it similar? It's subliminal. Is subliminal same as inmost being?
Inner being, not inmost being. Subliminal is the same as the inner being, not the inmost being.
Okay.
Uh,
Of course, sometimes Sri Aurobindo has referred to the inmost being also 1 or 2 times. He has referred as the inner being. You have to understand the context in which he is speaking, because as a whole, everything is inner. Right? We can't contrast with the outer. So tomorrow we will go into we will start about the chakra, about the first from the bottom up. We'll go. Those Sri Aurobindo talks comes down from above below, but for our understanding with our limited mindsets, we'll go from below up. So we'll start that journey tomorrow. But understanding the chakras from Sri Aurobindo's perspective, understanding the work there, keeping this transformation as our main important thing. So anybody else will comment anything? Yes?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, I
yes.
didn't finish before.
Yes?
I had an interruption and I didn't finish. Can I continue?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Then I understand you assume the interlink between outer being and inner being. Then when we are in the inner being, as easy like I explained, can we use pranayama to connect with the inmost being?
With the inmost being, pranayama is, you see, the pranayama, what does it do? In the inner being, you see, in showing this classification that I will tell you. In showing this classification, the energy that is there at the outer being, the energy with which we act, is a derivative of the pranic shakti which is there in our inner being. Because in the outer being, our energy is limited because it is tapped by the mind and the body. So they limit our energy. We can't act much, but if we open into the pranic shakti, then the pranic shakti is connected with the which is the formation of the universal shakti in us, and it can be connected with the transcendent shakti. It can be connected with higher shaktis, the higher energies. So pranayama actually links you up with this pranic shakti and pranic shakti with the universal and even the higher shaktis. So pranayama is doing, in showing this classification of power of shakti, it is doing that work. That is the work of the soul is a bit different, behind in another dimension, but it is doing a very great work in the it is connecting our individual pranic shakti with the universal pranic shakti. With the pranayama, you can increase your energy repertoire. You can go from the individual pranic shakti, you can go and join it with the universal pranic shakti.
Okay, and then you can activate or increase your activation of the inner being through pranayama, but you can connect with the inmost being. How we can connect with
inner being is supported by the inmost being. In any case, the inner being is supported by the inmost being.
Yes.
With the support of the inmost being, your pranayama will get more focused. With that support of the inmost being, with the support of the soul, your pranayama will get more focused, will get more operative, or will be more beneficial.
Then we have to discover the connection between inner being and inmost being, isn't it? It's not clear. It's a discovery, real.
It's a self-discovery. Of course, you have to work on that, on the Shakti aspect.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, Ketki.
Yes, is Dr. Vasu, that you spoke about that intermediate space that one can fall into. So when mother said go within, and when you're going within towards your psychic being, towards the inmost beings, do you have that danger of
you can fall? You can fall. That's why this integral yoga. I can explain to you, this integral yoga means you have to do all things simultaneously. Otherwise, you will fall. So it's not only one thing. You have to go inside, but you have to bring harmony in the outer being. You have to work on your ego. You have to remember that you have to go to the superconscious ones. You have to remember that you have to clean the subconscious. All things you have to do. Otherwise, the integral perspective is there. Otherwise, focusing only on one thing without the other things can lead you into a problem.
But that intermediate space is different from cosmic consciousness.
Intermediate zone by intermediate zone, speaking specifically that space between the inner being and the outer being. Everything is inside cosmic consciousness. Everything is in space, but there is a special zone between the inner being and the outer being. When I talk about cosmic consciousness, I'm talking about the wider cosmic consciousness beyond our individual being.
Dr. Basu, will you share your slides with everyone? Your slides, your PowerPoint slides?
Yes. I will give it. I think at the end, I will give it to everybody.
Thank you.
I will share it. So Parvinder has asked this question: how do you know that the transformation has occurred? Is it yes or no thing? It's a continuous change. Throughout life, you have to work for that. You see, because there will be resistances until the supramental comes down. Nothing will be permanent. So at present, what I would say, if you ask me, what should be our present goal? Our present goal should be to prepare ourselves so that in our next lives we can be the intermediate beings which come between us and the supramental. So, and then Shivin has given hints of how you can come to that. I think when we have time in this session in the next few days, I will talk about it. So that we have to prepare ourselves to be intermediate beings. So that we are in the process of transformation. Through many lives it has to go, and there's a work that has to go on through many lives, so that it is continued even after our physical frame is not there. The work will still continue in our consciousness. Thank you, James. I think you should. James has to wind up.
Yeah. It was a really absorbing session, Dr. Basu. Very clear explanations of the process of descent, particularly, really resonated with me very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you everyone for participating in the session. We meet again tomorrow at 4 o'clock. I hope my voice is clear this time. I've had problems with my audio system. Is it clear?
Yes.
Okay, so goodbye everyone until tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.